Welcome everyone to Food Justice is Mutual Aid. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, pronouns, city, and favorite food. Also, please note the discussion portion of this workshop will be recorded. Hello, welcome everyone to Food Justice is Mutual Aid. We can go ahead and get started with the presentation. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today on this Tuesday. Please note that the discussion portion of this workshop will be recorded. And we would like to start off with a land acknowledgement. I am speaking from the physical space of New York City, and I would like to acknowledge the land on which I currently reside, which historically was that of the Lenape, Canarsie, Rockaway, and Wappinger indigenous peoples. We deliver a land acknowledgement to acknowledge the historical legacy of colonialism by honoring and paying respect to the land, which was taken by conquest, along with the domination of the people who inhabited the land and the imposition of white supremacy. We do it to raise greater public consciousness of Native sovereignty and cultural rights as a small step toward equitable relationship and reparation. We encourage the participants on today's call to privately acknowledge the land that sustains and supports you. If you do not already know your area's history, we have provided a link in the chat to learn more about the indigenous peoples that live or lived in your area. If you are new to Hunger Free America, HFA is a nonpartisan national nonprofit building the movement to enact the policies and programs needed to end domestic hunger and ensure that all Americans have sufficient access to nutritious food. We do this through both our direct service and advocacy work, both of which we feel strengthen each other. As the Hunger Free America AmeriCorps Vista leader, my work centers around the Anti-Hunger Corps program, which is a program that was implemented by Hunger Free America that brings volunteers through the Vista program into other organizations that help with the anti-hunger and anti-poverty work. So I work with these members as a Vista leader and support them in their goals and to achieve those goals, and also as a liaison between the organization and them. So HFA's work to end hunger is more pressing than ever. According to a report published by HFA in July 2020, the United States is facing the gravest hunger crisis in modern times, with more than 1 in 3 children missing meals or suffering from reduced portion sizes because their families don't have enough money for food. The rate of child hunger is 5 times higher than before the pandemic, and adult hunger is 2.5 times higher. As domestic hunger increases, all types of low-income families are suffering, but data shows that people of color are impacted at higher rates. HFA data shows that in the spring and summer of this year, 41.1% of Black respondent households experienced food insecurity, as did 36.9% of Hispanic households, in contrast to 23.2% of white respondent households. As a global pandemic and demands for racial justice collide, it is more important than ever to uplift MLK's message of justice. For over 2 decades, Hunger Free America has honored Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy by coordinating service events and volunteer actions supporting long-term solutions to hunger. With this year's Serve-a-Thon, our hope is that volunteers will learn something new, take action in the fight against hunger, as well as take away some ideas on how to continue working towards and supporting a more equitable community. As we begin the workshop, I'd like to introduce some group norms to frame our dialogue. A safe space is a brave space. We are called to create a brave space where we accept the likelihood that we will feel uncomfortable when investigating issues of race, privilege, and oppression, and our roles within them. Work to recognize your privileges. Use this space to recognize and investigate your privileges, for example, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability. Honor the different experiences we all bring to the space. Take risks, lean into discomfort. We are all in process. Challenge yourself to contribute, even if it is not perfectly formulated. Actively listen. Use your energy to listen to what is said before thinking about how to respond. Notice when defensiveness and denial arise. If anyone has any additional norms to add, we welcome them in the chat. Today's workshop is titled Food Justice is Mutual Aid, an alternative to the charity model. To speak on these topics, I'd like to introduce our co-host, Liam Elkind, founder of Invisible Hands Deliver, which serves the New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania area. Liam, can you tell us a bit more about Invisible Hands Deliver?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction, Kayla. It's awesome to be talking with you all, and thank you for all the work that that you've been doing and that you're going to continue to do to serve people who are experiencing food insecurity right now. As you alluded to, it is one of the biggest and fastest growing problems in this country and around the world. But I'd like to start by providing a quote from Dr. King that I think helps frame our discussion. He said, "Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love." And I think that speaks to a lot of different areas, particularly one of privilege, and that often the charity model relies on people with privilege coming in, riding in on their white horse to save the day for everybody else. And one thing that I've really enjoyed about the mutual aid model, which we can dive into a little bit more as we continue this discussion, is the notion that we all have something to offer one another, and we all have something we can receive from one another. And especially right now, when we're all in our little Zoom boxes talking from wherever we may be around the country, what we can offer each other right now is a sense of community and hope and purpose. And that's what I've been able to find. Maggie is our volunteer engagement coordinator. She's been with Invisible Hands for several months. I've never met her in person. And yet I feel like I know her very well. And that's one of those weird things where even at this time, when the world is pulling us all apart, we're still able to find ways to pull together. And to me, I think that it is only by pulling together that we'll pull through. So Invisible Hands is a newly formed nonprofit formed in March as the pandemic was beginning to take over New York City, which is where I'm from. And I was looking for something good to do in the world. We were all being told, right, like, be a hero, stay home. And I was like, I get it. I understand the importance of social distancing, but at the same time, social distancing feels so sad. And why can't it be physical distancing with social engagement? At the same time, I was seeing a bunch of elderly folks and people with disabilities shopping for themselves at a time when, to be fair, this was back when it was like, use hand sanitizer, you'll be fine, before masks were a thing that we knew we were supposed to wear. But I was seeing folks who I was like, I think you should probably be staying at home. You shouldn't have to take this risk on yourself. So I knew I wanted to do something good to serve my community, but had no idea what it could look like until I saw a post on Facebook from a friend of mine who said, does anybody know of a volunteer organization that I could volunteer for to deliver food to the elderly? And people were commenting on the Facebook post saying, wow, it sounds like a great idea. Let me know if you hear of one. I don't know what that organization is, though. And so I DM'd her on Facebook and I said, what if we made that organization? We built a website and passed around a couple flyers and put out a call to action on social media. And within 72 hours, we had 1,300 people signed up for this organization that we had not yet created. And we were like, oh my God, okay, now we actually have to build some infrastructure to support this whole thing. And what originally started as a group chat for people, for volunteers in our area, trying to figure out how to get food to people who needed it most. Once we had 1,300 people, we were like, okay, now we have to get off of group text and move into something actually more sustainable. And so we started just building this infrastructure around that system where anyone in need could either call us on the phone or submit a request through our website. We added an accessibility widget on our website for those who are visually or motor impaired. And they could submit a request for a food delivery from a grocery store, and our volunteer would go shop for them and bring it to their home. As food insecurity continued to become a deeper problem, we realized it went beyond just food inaccessibility, right? It wasn't just folks who would like to go to the store but can't because of COVID and want someone to do their delivery for them. It was people who, either due to the pandemic or predating the pandemic, couldn't afford food to begin with. And with our first $50 donation, I remember when we were setting up the website, we were trying to decide between doing the $16 a month website or the $26 a month website, but the $26 a month website lets you take donations. And we were like, all right, well, someone will donate the $10 to cover the cost. And then we started getting all this money in because people were really responding to that notion of mutual aid and community service and pulling together in this time of crisis. And I remember we got a $50 donation. We were like, oh my God, what are we going to do with all this money? We felt rich. And, I'm a college student, so my natural inclination is to, buy beer and pizza with it. But, we thought, okay, well, obviously we will put it back into the community. And so we began a subsidy program to not only deliver food to people from grocery stores, but actually pay for those people's food ourselves. And so it was great. We did $30 per household per week. We were able to help hundreds of families. The problem was word spread too quickly, right, for our own good. And by day, I think it was like day 4 or day 5, Bernie Sanders had actually emailed out my personal phone number to his entire panelist and said, call this number if you need free food. Didn't specify in New York, didn't specify up to $30. Just said, call this number, because the original flyer had my personal phone number on it. So I remember at like 2 a.m., I started getting like dozens of calls from Fort Worth, Texas. And I was like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And the problem was, once demand started increasing so much, we were a couple days old. We didn't have the money to support this, to tackle food insecurity on a national scale. And so it was really tough, but we ended up having to shut down the subsidy program. We were able to serve almost 1,000 people with it, or 1,000 households with it, but we ended up having to shut it down. And it was really painful for people who thought they could rely on us and were beginning to rely on us. So ever since then, we've been looking for new ways to provide free food to people. And that's been through partnerships with community organizations, with religious institutions, with mutual aid organizations throughout the city, throughout the country, with food pantries in our area, partnering with organizations who are explicitly designed to provide food. And then we are able to provide that last mile delivery to the people who need it most. It's estimated that up to 50% of people who could benefit from the use of a food pantry don't go to the food pantry because of the social stigma associated with experiencing food insecurity. And one of the nice things about a delivery system is not only is it safe and efficient and lets you not wait in line for hours, but it's also anonymous, and people can preserve some of their dignity in that way. Tackling the stigma around food insecurity is a whole nother issue that should be tackled, but people need food, and so we want to make sure that we are delivering it to them in a way that expresses solidarity, not charity. That's essentially our model, with the one additional note that we really do try to provide a social connection for these people as well, and that is beneficial on all sides, right? I know I have been really heartened by the friends that I've made through this. I completed a delivery up in the Bronx this past weekend, and the woman I delivered to kept just saying, "God is good, God is good." She hadn't had a delivery of food in weeks, and they were on their last legs. It was really, really tough. But the graciousness that was shown to me by the church from which I delivered and the person to whom I delivered was immense. It has been such a profound experience for me as a 21-year-old to see the change that that literally a Facebook post can make. And it has been a reminder that, even when the world is pulling us apart, the only way that we can pull through is by pulling together. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm so grateful for all the work that we're about to do together, but I think Kayla has some questions for me as well.
Yeah, well, thank you, Liam, so much for all of the incredible work that you've been doing. It's also nice for me to hear more about your organization and just your cause and everything like that, which is really inspiring. And I can't believe your age. You are just so mature for, how old you are and stuff. And
that's very kind. My parents would beg to differ, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I thought I was a baby, but yes. But yeah, I have a couple questions to ask you. But the MLK ServeaThon, though, aspires to continue and raise awareness of MLK's mission for social and racial justice. So how does your organization contribute to the fight to end racial injustice?
Yeah, The fight for racial justice and the fight for food justice are, I think, intimately and inextricably linked. Um, the impact, as you described earlier, the disparate impact that COVID and food insecurity and economic insecurity has on Black and Brown communities is enormous. And I think for a lot of people, it has not only exacerbated those disparities, but for a lot of people, I think it has unveiled those disparities, that a lot of people who were hanging on by a thread don't have access to that thread now. And so when we talk about prioritizing delivering to people and households experiencing food insecurity, our primary target population that we're trying to serve there must be communities of color who have fallen on particularly difficult times. It is striking the differences in that communities of color experience. And I will say, it's not just an issue of lack of access to economic opportunities. It is also explicitly policy driven, right? In the community where I was just this past weekend in the Bronx, the city just didn't provide city services in that community. There were, I remember there was one gentleman who, there was a rat on the sidewalk, and he was like, that rat has been there for a week. No, we've called the city, no one's picked up. He was like, all right, and he went and got a shovel and cleaned it up. And that, but it is a policy of neglect on the part of at least my city, New York, but certainly around the country as well, that needs to change from a top-down structure. And so at the same time, though, that gentleman went out, got his shovel, and cleaned it up himself. And so when people in power aren't responding to the needs of a community, it ends up falling on those communities to organize themselves. And so that's what we can do for now. It is by no means a sustainable or an acceptable alternative. There needs to be both. There needs to be community level engagement to fight these issues of food insecurity, and leadership at a municipal, state, and federal level to help guide policy in a more equitable way. And then just to touch on the issue of Dr. King, he believed in a world, he dreamt of a world devoid of food insecurity, where everyone could access 3 healthy, safe meals a day. And I think that one issue in food insecurity that isn't often tackled is that of dignity. That a lot of people who are experiencing food insecurity often feel like they're just handed food, and the beggars can't be choosers, and here's what you get. But I think actually when you provide people with choice, it is a signal that you value their humanity. And when you are able to say, even would you like a cookie or a brownie? It can be really validating to people that their decisions and their opinions and their values matter to other people. And so I think it is not just an issue of hunger, but an almost deeper hunger of validation and inclusion that is really important that we tackle as well.
Yeah, definitely. And you've already touched upon the importance of community. So can you expand more on the mutual aid model and how that relates to community and community building?
Yeah, absolutely. The mutual aid model, it's so interesting. It's one that I think has really exploded during the pandemic. It's I hesitate to say gone viral. I think that's probably a phrase we shouldn't be using anymore, but it's one that's really taken off, and I think for good reason. I think a lot of nonprofits operate, and this is something that I say with very little experience in nonprofits, only the past year in which I've kind of been thrown into leading this accidental nonprofit. But what I've seen from a lot of organizations that have the best of intentions is the goal setting is done by the people in power. They say, okay, here's the need in the community, and here's how we're going to tackle it, and aren't we so great, and let's go ahead and do it. And that can be really great. That can have a lot of really great impacts, and I don't want to discount that. At the same time, there is some level of not listening to the actual communities that are most impacted, right? And I think there is something to the notion that the people closest to the pain should be the people closest to the power. And one of the nice things about a mutual aid model is that it buys into that whole notion of we all have something to offer one another, and we all have something to receive from one another, that it's not about riding in on a white horse to save the day. It's not about charity, it's about solidarity. And you can see that in community fridges, where people who have extra food will drop it off, and nobody is praising their name and singing cheers to them. and they just do it out of the goodness of their hearts, and other people come by and pick it up when they need it. And when that first person falls on hard times and needs food, it will be there for them. And it helps remove some of the issues of dignity and class that can often complicate and imbalance the power relationship between the volunteer and the recipient of the service. And it makes it more about how do we as a community operate in a more sustainable way. That for us has, I think, been a really effective model, because I think a lot of our volunteers, the people who sign up to serve people in their community, are able to get so much out of it, whether it's literal service hours that they need for school or whatever, or just a friend in their community. I have made so many friends during this socially isolating pandemic, and it has helped my mental health tremendously to be able to make those friends. It's estimated that that social isolation can be as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, whereas engaged social contact can reduce your risk of an early death by up to 50%. And whether you are someone who needs a food delivery or is able to provide a food delivery, that connection with someone in your community can be immensely powerful. I got an email recently from a woman who lived in Michigan. Her father lived in New York. He lived alone. He had been diagnosed with COVID, and he had no way of getting food. He was in his 80s. He didn't want to, give anybody else COVID. And she saw us on TV and submitted a request. And his volunteer, Hunter, would deliver to him every week and drop off a bag of groceries outside the door. And then they would sit on either side of his door and chat about their lives and their fears and their joys. And they never once saw each other. They wouldn't have recognized each other if they passed on the street, but they became friends. And he passed away from COVID, but his daughter wrote to us and said that this volunteer, this complete stranger, was able to provide some support and some comfort in his final days. That to me is what mutual aid is about. It's about seeing needs in your community that you can fill, building connections with people in your own community, and helping each other get through this alive and the better for it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that story. That's incredibly inspiring and impactful. And I think like those relationships that we build, like just person to person, are incredibly important. And so what would you say does your organization, like in what ways in those relationships do they engage in the intersectional justice work? Like how do you see those kinds of things that you're building on also engage with the work that Martin Luther King Jr. like inspired as well too?
Totally. Well, one thing I was just thinking about was I think a lot of nonprofits and volunteer organizations that have a mission, whatever that mission is, often it feels like they're kind of bussing in people from one side of town into the other side of town to do service work. And there's value to that. I don't want to discount that. But one of the cool things about Invisible Hands is folks sign up to serve their own community. And Invisible Hands is able to operate as nothing more and nothing less than a connective tissue between members within a community. And so, community members are able to understand one another's idiosyncrasies and values and desires and needs in a way that someone who isn't will have a much tougher time doing. And so I think one of the beauties of the mutual aid and community justice model is that it allows folks to make friends within their own communities and understand one another better. With respect to intersectional justice work, I think, again, it comes back to that notion of where is the need greatest and how can we help each other with that need. When this started out, it was intended as a small little thing to deliver groceries to my neighbor down the hall. And as more and more people got involved, they were able to provide more and more suggestions on how we can continue to improve it. Maggie, our volunteer engagement coordinator, has done a fantastic job at putting together what we call our volunteer leadership committee, which is a group of several dozen of our top volunteers, and we meet bi-weekly, and they share advice on how we can be doing better. I think that striving towards continual improvement and continued responsiveness to our community is the best way to serve intersectional justice, because we are able to bring together people from all different walks of life, from all different boroughs in New York or neighborhoods in Philadelphia, and to talk about what we could be doing better as a community-based organization. And you talked about rules for the road of this conversation, and one of them being active listening. And that has been the biggest part for me as a young person involved in social justice work, also as a white dude from Morningside Heights, to be able to listen and hear what the need is, hear what other similar organizations have done to serve their communities, and then thinking, let's take that information that we've gotten and let's think a little bit outside the box. How can we broaden our horizons? How can we think beyond the conventional models of service towards something a little bit bigger?
Yeah, well said. And also, I just wanted to read the chat too. David said, well said, and Hillary commented, so wonderful, you are providing such a valuable service, so bless you. And
thank you, Hillary, I appreciate that.
I also, agree with these sentiments as well too. And with that being said, I'll ask one more question. How can we better support your mission? People on this chat, or just people in general, how can we help support Invisible Hands Deliver?
Well, thank you for asking that question, and thank you, Hillary, and thank you all for being here to help us out. So one answer is you're already doing it. Thank you for the work that we're about to do together. Two, I would say is please help spread the word. To your friends and family, your social networks. This organization began because of a post on social media. That is how it will continue to spread. If you have money, we will never say no to money. If you have time, please consider visiting us. I will send the link in the chat. Our website. And we take remote volunteers if you'd like to help out in our call center, to take in requests via phone from folks in need. If you want to volunteer in our dispatch center, helping take delivery volunteers through the process, or if you'd like to bring Invisible Hands to your neighborhood, if you think that it's a thing that could be valuable and needed in your community, I would love to work with you on recruiting volunteers and spreading the word within your own community. Those are a few of the ways. But honestly, if you have ideas on how we could be doing better, that is also helpful. We are a new organization. There is very little ego involved in what we do. I know there are things we could be doing better. And so if you have ideas or experiences in the nonprofit world or the mutual aid world, I welcome that as well. But I'm incredibly grateful for all your help. So thank you, everybody.
Should we leave the floor open for questions? Is that all right with you? Yeah, okay, great. So if you have a question, we would like to ask you to please let us know in the chat or signal by raising your hand, and I will call on you to unmute and ask your question. So yeah, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat or also raise your hand.
One other thing I will just say is, Invisible Hands began, as I said, with the desired goal being, let's deliver to people who are particularly vulnerable during COVID. But even as we look beyond the immediate impacts of COVID, right, the racial and economic inequities unveiled, exacerbated, and perpetuated by this disease are unfortunately going to pervade our society long after this disease has passed. And I think one of the things that keeps me up at night is the fear that we will become complacent once everyone's gotten their 2 shots, and we will think, great, we did it, let's move on now. And it's really important that we remember there are going to be long-standing impacts of this disease for years and potentially decades to come, particularly with food insecurity. This crisis has worsened food insecurity to a really, really scary degree. And whether you've seen the pictures of food pantries online or in person or not at all, I recommend that you check it out, because it is scary, and it is going to be long lasting. And so whether it's with Invisible Hands or with another organization, I hope you get involved in fighting against food insecurity. Because it can be one of the most damaging things to households and to families. And that's why we are, even though we began as a COVID crisis response, we are relentlessly building new partnerships with food pantries, mutual aid organizations, religious institutions, places that have food or funding that we can then leverage to bring food to the people who need it most. And so we are in this for the long haul. And I hope that that you join us as well.
Yes, thank you, Liam. Yeah, I was going to ask that question as well, like what the organization would look like post-COVID, you know, because of course this is like very pressing right now, and a pressing organization that is needed now. But yeah, it's good to know that like you've seen, you know, post this, like you're going to continue the work. And yeah, it sounds
I should probably go back to school at some point, or my parents might kick me out. But yes, I'm very excited to continue this work for sure.
Oh, it's awesome. And it's like exciting to see where it will go, you know. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. No question is a dumb question. You can also put in the chat as well too, or raise your hand, whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay, Marina raised their hand, so Marina.
Yes, and thank you for saying my name beautifully. I appreciate that. I have a lot of emotions and thoughts running through my head. But first of all, thank you, Liam and Maggie. I think you're also associated with Invisible Hands. But I am someone who has utilized mutual aid myself through difficult times, and really appreciate the local, specifically in Austin, community that has been building up this model. And I'm just hearing a lot of like parallels in what you're talking about, Liam. But in the space that I'm in the AmeriCorps Vista space.
Oh, yeah.
And I work a lot with our AmeriCorps Vista members that focus on food hardship and really looking into data. And so that's kind of where my question is geared towards, a lot of my emotions aside. But what are some of the data tools that you've utilized that have been really helpful in kind of visualizing the realities?
Sure. Do you mean data tools in terms of internal usage, or research that we've done externally?
Yeah, like research that you've done externally.
Totally. Well, first of all, thank you for all the work that you're doing with AmeriCorps. It's a fantastic organization, and CNCS needs more funding. Second of all, what I'll say is one thing that you made me think of before I get to your question explicitly. I think the mutual aid model has a lot of strengths. I also think that one weakness of the mutual aid model is that it doesn't come often with that kind of institutional support that is needed, which makes it difficult to be sustainable. It often ends up forcing a lot of volunteers into burnout, because they're expected not only to for instance, in our model, like complete deliveries, but also to pay for it for themselves out of pocket, which can, there's only so much money people have. And so it can put a lot of strain on folks. There's often not insurance in a mutual aid organization. And that can be tough if a legal problem were ever to come up, or there were to be an accident and someone needed help. So there are definitely shortcomings with the typical mutual aid model, as I've seen. And so we've kind of tried to straddle those two models. In terms of data, I've looked a lot at the resources that I've found to be helpful. Were namely Feeding America. They do a lot of good, not only work, but they do a lot of good research. And then also Robin Hood Foundation. They're an anti-poverty organization in New York City. They are very institutional, like backed by wealthy people. And so they have the resources to do a lot of that kind of research themselves. And so that's been really helpful for me as well. Another cool feature that we found just internally is being able to track which zip codes get the most traction. Where are people requesting deliveries from grocery stores most often versus deliveries from pantries most often. And so that, while obviously on a smaller scale, we're not doing huge data-backed research projects ourselves, though, if you know any millionaires who would like to fund one of those, I am more than open to it. But it has been interesting there as well to see the different depths of poverty, even in the different boroughs of New York, and seeing that, wow, okay, so in Manhattan, there's a lot of folks who, say near Times Square, makes sense. People don't want to go outside because it's near Times Square. In the Bronx, the bigger concern is food insecurity, not being able to afford their own food in the first place. And so, I can tell you that on a kind of anecdotal level, that's what we've seen. And then on a broader level as well, it jives with what we're seeing from those bigger institutional organizations. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yes, thank you. A lot of our AmeriCorps members work with zip code data levels as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's how we organize our neighborhoods as well.
Mhm.
When we first started, we thought, okay, there's way too many people here, and if someone in Staten Island doesn't want to be completing a delivery in the Bronx, that doesn't make any sense. And so it's probably a better model to divide it up into neighborhoods. And so we did zip code based neighborhoods. And so if I live in Morningside Heights, so if somebody needs a delivery in Morningside Heights, I will get notified about that. I might not get notified about the Staten Island delivery.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much, Liam.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marina, for your question. I see a couple of people, as well as Marina, sharing some resources in the chat. So please feel free to check those out as well. So thank you for sharing those resources with us. Also, Jason had a question too. Where did the name Invisible Hands come from?
I wish I could take credit for this. This was my co-founder Simone. It was very late one night. Like 2 a.m. about, and we were very sleep deprived, and we were trying to come up with a name for this organization that we were creating a website for. And her first thought was, Netflix and chill. Her thought was to name it Net Fix the Ill. And then we thought, nope, that's terrible. Let's choose something else. And so she texted me, I think it was literally like 3 a.m. I went back and checked recently. And she goes, Invisible Hands. What if we called it Invisible Hands? It was not intended as a kind of reference to Adam Smith or the free market, though there are all kinds of implications you can draw from that. But the notion was, it's not about who we are. It's not about, look at me, I'm so great, ha ha ha. It's about the interaction that is invisible, that we can't see each other right now. And we can't engage directly with one another, but we can still help each other. And if you look at the, our logo, as well as those little hands clasping each other, that's what it's about. It's not about the identities of each individual person. It's about the connection between the two of them. And even though right now those connections have to be invisible, they're still valuable connections nonetheless.
Yeah.
So there's some profound meaning in there. It is also probably like 50% just sleep deprivation, not gonna lie.
No, that's great. No, I remember working, because I was in AmeriCorps person last year, and I was working in like development at Hunger Free America, and I was doing like a thing for Invisible Hands, and I thought, wow, that's a really great name. As I was just like doing the little project thing, it's like, I wonder how they came up with that. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Question. At one point, the Invisible Hand Foundation, which is another thing, reached out to us, and they were like, we're getting a lot of calls from people who think that we're you, and then we had to figure all that out. It was fine. It worked out fine. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Well, I'm sure it was you guys. So yeah. But yes, yeah, great name. Does anyone else have any other questions that Liam or Maggie could answer as well too? Well, of course, we'll give all of you just follow-up information after this.
I think I see Marina raising her hand again.
I didn't want to take up too much space, y'all. I apologize if there's anyone else that has anything, but my brain is racing again. And then I had a follow-up question for Liam or Maggie. Something that I've learned throughout my service and that has stuck with me, that one of my Vista colleagues have shared. I've been in the AmeriCorps Vista field for about going on 4 years. So I just try to really appreciate all my colleagues, and one of my favorite things that stuck with me is nothing about us without us. And a lot of the work that we do, it's specifically working with coalitions on a community level. I don't think I shared that context with everyone, but one of my questions for y'all is, how do you mindfully involve the community in some of the work that you do in kind of making decisions?
Totally. Well, I can let Maggie answer this, and then I can follow up if I have any other thoughts.
In terms of making decisions for, the future of Invisible Hands, is that?
Yeah, and I guess some of the processes and to people.
Sure, thank you for asking that. And that directly correlates with what we're going to be doing today. As part of my job, as Liam mentioned, is I moderate the Volunteer Leadership Committee, which is a group of volunteers who, are committed to the mission of Invisible Hands, and who we collectively gather together twice a month to talk about what we want to see from this organization. And just on a personal note, a lot of times working for Invisible Hands feels like a group project for college or school. It feels like, okay, we have a problem. How can we collectively figure it out together? And, you know, a lot of what we're going to be doing today in our research is, well, we have areas where we have an influx of orders, you know, recipients who are waiting, you know, a while for food. So we need to get more volunteers in those areas. How do we solve that problem? Okay, let's partner with schools, organizations in that area to get the word out. So I really appreciate that question, because it's a lot of groupthink and it's a lot of problem solving. And, you know, as these projects and problems come up, it's getting creative in how, you know, how you do that. And, you know, we have a great team working behind the scenes who are so dedicated and are so smart. And yeah, it's a group effort. I hope that answered your question. Liam, feel free to.
Yeah, no, thank you, Maggie. I would also just, the one thing I would add is when we reach out to new partner organizations, our question isn't usually, here's what we do, work with us, which is more of a statement than a question. It's how can we help? It is, what do you do? Let us learn about what you're doing, and how can we help you? And what we found overall is relatively consistent models with which we can work and plug in our volunteer core into it. One of the nice things about being such a young, fresh organization is that we are able to pivot very quickly. You know, just as a small example, when Governor Cuomo of New York announced a statewide mask mandate in April or May, after the word on the street had been, don't wear masks, they don't help, and save them for the hospitals, we thought, okay, well, sure, that makes sense now, but how are we going to make sure that all of our volunteers have access to masks when they're out completing deliveries? So we started what was called glove hubs, where neighborhood hubs in each neighborhood, someone had a stockpile of masks and gloves and hand sanitizer and PPE, so that anybody in that neighborhood, if they couldn't afford or didn't have the time or whatever to buy PPE, they could stop off at that person's house and pick up PPE. And it was a pretty successful model. And I think one of the reasons we were able to make that happen and make it so that volunteering wouldn't be cost prohibitive was our relative novelty compared to a bunch of other organizations. And so I think our adaptability to listen and
Awesome. That's good general advice too.
Yeah, I heard it from Hillary Clinton, and I really liked it.
Nice. All right, y'all. Thank you. I'm taking a step back. I really appreciate
Thank you, Marina.
everyone's responses.
Thank you, Marina, for your question again. Yeah, we have a couple more questions in the chat, if that's all right. So thank you to Julie for sending all of these great resources. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Hillary asked, will you give your follow-up information regarding connecting food to our area food banks and ways to deliver food, and basically how will we be able to help outside of NYC? That's Hillary's question.
The answer is absolutely. There are, you can certainly look up, food banks in my area and volunteer there. I know that a lot of them are often in need of additional volunteer support. But Invisible Hands is also itself looking to expand. I always talk about our expansion as both a breadth and a depth expansion. We're looking to grow our depth and go deeper in the communities we're already serving, build new partnerships with pantries, et cetera, but also expand our geographic breadth. This is not a New York City pandemic. This is not local, it's a global pandemic. And so we want to find ways to serve communities nationwide. And so, it is a lot of work. But if recruiting volunteers and building partnerships with pantries and stuff like that is something that you'd be interested in, then for sure Maggie will be putting up an email slide with our email, and please do email us there. We'd be very grateful to and excited to work with you. Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you for your question. Also, one more thing from Julie, or just a general question too, like how do you service people who refuse to wear masks, who also, refuse to wear any kind of PPE or don't believe in that it helps or anything like that?
Totally. And this goes to a broader question of when you are one person, a volunteer, how you deal with a crisis or a conflict in general. One of the nice things, thank you for saying that, Maggie. One of the nice things that we've been lucky to have is very low frequency of conflict or any issue. If it's an issue regarding payment, for instance, if someone is paying for their own food and something goes wrong, we keep a discretionary fund that we can use to reimburse the volunteer and make them whole, or reimburse the recipient if there's a problem on the volunteer side. With respect to people not wearing masks, I'm trying to think. I think the biggest issue that we've had was when there was a store that somebody wanted a delivery from, and people in that store were typically not wearing masks. And so what we did in that instance, so we told the recipient, hey, this is a problem. We don't want to send our volunteers into this area. If there's another store in your area, we would love to serve you from there. If a recipient doesn't wear a mask, I can't think of an instance in which that's happened, but one of the nice things is that our volunteers, what we usually do is I will, bring the bags of food, I will drop it outside the door, and then I'll back up to 6 feet anyway, and then the person comes out and picks up the food. So it doesn't usually end up being too much of an issue because there's also physical distance between them.
Yes, thank you, Liam, for that and for that note.
But it's a great question, and
yeah, definitely.
It's super stressful to be walking down the street and seeing folks not wearing masks.
But it's good to hear also how people deal with, all of those kinds of things and ways to navigate those things too, as well. So very important. Also, Maggie put down in the chat, if you have any questions, if you guys have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to team@invisiblehandsdeliver.org. And with that, I will love to introduce you, Maggie. Weston, you've already heard from her, but she is the Director of Volunteer Engagement at Invisible Hands Deliver, who will be leading volunteers in the service project. So welcome, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Kayla. And thank you, Liam and Kayla, both of you, and for what a wonderful conversation and everybody's questions. Thank you. So your assignment today, should you choose to accept it, is to do a little research for us, which is going to be so incredibly helpful. I'm going to walk you guys through our 2 teams today, and I have already assigned you an area. So first I'll go through the instructions of what we're doing. Then I'll give you your assignments. And if anybody has any questions, please drop them in the chat or voice them over here on Zoom, because I'm sure if you have a question, somebody else might have the same one as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen very quickly so you guys can get a sense of what we're doing today. Cool. So we have this sheet that we will all be working on. The first team is going to be the volunteer outreach team. And the second team is going to be the food pantry outreach team. You'll find these 2 tabs at the bottom of the sheet. So the first team is our volunteer outreach team. As Liam said, we have found it beneficial to partner with schools and local organizations in the areas that we have been finding an influx of orders. We find this relationship is mutually beneficial. A lot of schools have required volunteering hours. Some organizations like to host service days, much like today. And so we connect with them, introduce ourselves, and try to form a partnership. So there are no right and wrong answers with this research that we're doing today. Feel free to get creative, and I'll sort of walk you through what we're going to be looking for. So as you can see in the